Prithvi Shantirantarikshakam Shantir Dyav Shantir Dishashantiravantara Disha Shantiragnishantir Vayushantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapah Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in our body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
We will sing Sitting at Thy Feet on page 36.
Jaya Jaya Rama
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmageti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is Ramakrishna's three gifts. Last Sunday, we had a special worship to celebrate his birthday. And according to the lunar calendar, his birthday fell on Tuesday last. And so this Sunday, we are reflecting a little bit about Ramakrishna, his life, his words. When we try to think about the lives of Ramakrishna and teachers like him, there are many different ways that reflection can go, and many different ways we can do it. One way clearly is to know the biographical details of his life and how he lived and what are the words, which of his teachings have become meaningful to us and so on. Another way would be to step back and ask the question, what does his life mean to us today? He's not as old historically as the Buddha, Jesus, and some of these prophets of the millennia ago, 2 millennia ago. But so he's relatively recent, and yet not that recent. He's now more than 150 years almost. So what does his life mean to us today? Oftentimes, these great ones have been adored in many different ways. Ramakrishna is considered by many to be an incarnation. And the concept of incarnation or avatar is itself a big mystery. It's a mystery now, and it has always been a mystery. Among Ramakrishna's disciples as well, everyone had a different idea about what an incarnation is or who an avatar is. And those of us who have studied his books, the record of his conversations called the Gospel of Ramakrishna, we see that he often encouraged his students and devotees to thrash out their different ideas they might have on a certain subject. And so, for instance, on page 732 of that book, we see that Ramakrishna was visiting the home of one of his disciples named Girish Ghosh. He was the great dramatist of Bengal in those days. And he had this very firm conviction that God does descend periodically to come and be and teach humanity. So he believed in avatar. At that time, Narendranath, a young man who later became Vivekananda, he was like, I don't believe in all these incarnation. And so a little bit of a generation gap, you might say, but also two different ways of thinking. And so Ramakrishna said, well, have a discussion, argue your points. Let's see who has a better way to express their ideas. And then the book goes on to say that a lot of ideas went back and forth. Of course, there's no way we could say, oh, the problem has been solved, because even today, many of us still have similar questions. Not that there have not been answers, but these answers have come in many different forms. And again, there is no one definitive answer. What we do know, looking at history, is that extraordinary human beings have appeared on the face of this earth in different parts of the world. And their lives were an inspiration not only to their contemporaries, but also to generations of people afterwards. They were so extraordinary in terms of um, the purity of their lives, their love, their understanding, their compassion. It was so extraordinary that oftentimes people began to wonder whether are they just human beings like us? Um, were they just human beings who had somehow exalted themselves to a very higher stage? Or maybe was it some super power, the divine, was somehow come down on this plane to teach us? And so this coming down, the Sanskrit word avatara, it comes from the root, meaning to descend. It's come down. And hence this has always been a mystery. And among the different reasons that have been given was in the Gita, for instance, we find one explanation in the 4th chapter of the Gita of why God would want to come down. And there's that well-known verse, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Now, put simply, it means that whenever adharma or evil or unrighteousness increases in the world, and whenever the dharma or goodness is on the decline, somehow a divine power descends. And what does it do? To help and protect the good people and to punish the wicked. This power descends, and then dharma samsthapana, it establishes the rule of what is right, what is good, the rule of dharma. So that's been one of the ways they have tried to understand that an incarnation comes. Now this, again, we try to analyze this, and it somehow seems to make sense when you especially go to some of these very historically ancient personalities in the Indian subcontinent. It literally seems to make sense. When we read the life of Krishna, of Rama, we actually see them slaying all these demons and helping people who are good and are trying to be good. But then when we come later on, we come to the life of Buddha, Jesus, and even further down we come to Ramakrishna and others, we see that, well, they didn't kill anyone. And so what does it mean, slaying of demons or destroying this evil? Also, historically when we see, sure, a lot of good, they did a lot of good, but doesn't seem like that after their physical departure, suddenly all the evil had disappeared. If anything, it just seems to be increasing day by day. So what does it mean, establishment of dharma, dharma samsthapana? It's not that easy to understand the reasoning even behind it. I mean, there are several other questions can come up as well. One is if God is omnipresent, if God is omnipotent, if God is everywhere, God is all-powerful. If at all any wrongs need to be created, God can do it from wherever God is. What's the need to come down? So all these questions. Now in devotional circles, sometimes it's expressed in different ways. It's that just as those who love God are eager to have a vision of God, to be close to God, God, who is like a loving father, is equally eager to be with his or her children. And so God then descends now and then to spend time with his or her children. So that's another way to see why God would want to come down in a human form. So there are all these different ways of thinking. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali refers to Ishvara. One way he says is, so Purvesham api Guruhu, that God is the teacher of all teachers, the most ancient source of all teaching. Now this way of understanding these extraordinary beings seems more in tune with the way people in our generation seem to think. Yeah, it just makes sense. The great ones come and they teach us. So Purvesham api Guruhu, the Yoga Sutra teaching somehow seems to be more in tune with the way many of us think in today. In a lecture that Vivekananda gave in San Francisco in 1900, this is what he said about divine incarnations. They are like the first lamps from which other lamps are lighted. True, the light is in everyone, but in most men and women it is hidden. The great souls are shining lights from the beginning. Those who come in contact with them have, as it were, their own lamps lighted. By this, the first lamp does not lose anything, yet it communicates its light to other lamps. 1,000,000 lamps are lighted, but the first lamp goes on shining with undiminished light. These great ones, whom you call incarnations of God, are mighty spiritual giants. They come and set in motion a tremendous spiritual current by transmitting their power to their immediate disciples and through them to generations after generations of disciples. So that's one way that Vivekananda tried to then, although as a young man we can see he was arguing first about whether even the existence of this phenomenon called the avatar. Later, as he grew up and his ideas really evolved, and then this is the way it made sense to him. We find one other instance in Ramakrishna's life when, towards the end of his life, when he was being treated for throat cancer, the physician who was treating him, the name of Dr. Sarkar, and he was skeptical also about the phenomenon called incarnation, and more skeptical as well about, oh, this person whom I'm treating, why do all these disciples of him treat him almost like a divine being? And so he was, as typically some people are like, oh, he said he's such a saintly person. Why are you kind of trying to say he's divine and all of that? There's no need to say all this. And then Vivekananda was still a young man then, and so he said, he gives the analogy. He says that especially when you go to microorganisms, that at some point it's not always easy to determine that a certain microorganism belongs to the plant kingdom or the animal kingdom. It's kind of, there is a threshold, there is an ambiguity about it. And so he says, similarly, that the meeting ground between what we generally treat as divine and what we generally treat as human, so that the meeting point, and there is an ambiguity, someone who is at that threshold, who shows characteristics of the divine and also who shows human characteristics, someone at that stage. So he said that's how we look at Ramakrishna. And then later on he did say that that's another way of looking at an avatar. An avatar is not simply divine, not simply human. Oftentimes, many of these great ones have been described as fully human and fully divine at the same time. Again, as I said, there are many different ways people have tried to understand this phenomenon. What we do know, as I said, is that when we look back at history, we see great personages come, and it's left to us then. We can create categories. We can say that this is a saint, and this is a prophet, and this is an incarnation, and so on. And then we can argue about those categories. But the observed fact is that there are these great ones who come. So another way which we might look at these great ones is, whoever they may be, and whatever may be the theological explanations that can satisfy some people, from our perspective, we can say that when I look at this life, which may be a few hundred years old or a few centuries old, how does it impact me today? Because for whatever or whoever these great ones may be, what ultimately does matter is how does it change me? How does it affect me? Why are these personalities meaningful to me in life? What do I gain from them? And it's in that sense, therefore, the title of today's reflection is on 3 gifts of Ramakrishna. So one way would be to look that each of these great teachers bring certain gifts to us. Now, there is no one definitive way, so these are the gifts. Again, this is completely subjective. So each of us may, when we study these lives, we may come up with our own understanding and own reflection about what gifts we may have received. But in general, we could say that, well, let me first quote to you from one verse from a Vedanta text called Drik Drishya Viveka. It's a tiny little book. There is this verse in it which says, Asti bhati priyam rupam namacheti amshapanchakam adyatrayam brahma rupam jagat rupam tatodvayam. And what it means is that every entity in this world has 5 characteristics. One is existence, cognizability, attractiveness, form, and name. And so this verse goes on to say that these first three belong to God. Existence, the ability to be aware of them, and the intrinsic meaning that they have. These 3 things are divine. The next 2 things, name and form, belong to this world. So each and every entity we see in life, we can see that it has all of these 5. In fact, some Vedanta teachers say that whatever we encounter in our lives, if we acquire the ability somehow to separate it from its name and form, what will remain is God. So again, God may not be someone who is in some distant place dwelling. That right now, we are encountering God every moment of our life. Because God is the only real existence. And yet, we are not seeing God. All that we are seeing is a bunch of people and things, living and non-living objects. But all of these living and non-living things that in front of us, everything has a name and everything has a form. Now, name, we may not really know the names, specific names of any person. So every person in Sanskrit, they say that everything has at least 2 names. One is a specific name. For instance, we could say it's a chair, a piano, a table. These are specific names. Again, in every language, the words will differ. But a more generic name would be, if a thing is near me, I say this. If it's far away from me, I say that. So if you do not know the specific name of anything, it's still know one name of it. You can say it's this or that. So that's the way this is figured out, that everything in this world has a name and everything has a form. Now, if I can find a way to, for instance, if I look at a chair, and if I acquire the ability to separate that name chair and the form chair from that object, there is God there. So we don't need to go anywhere to find God. All that we need to do is to somehow find a way to eliminate name and form, which is covering everything in this world. So that's the idea behind this. So if God were to somehow come in this plane of the world, God would have to acquire a name and form. And that's what we see. All of these great teachers, they come in a human form and they have a name. So we could say that the very first gift that Ramakrishna gives is his form. All of these great ones, they give a form. And that form has today become an object of meditation. for hundreds and thousands of people all over the world. And meditating on that form, praying to the divine in that form, people have found peace, people have found joy, people have found fulfillment, people have found meaning in their lives. So when this periodic descent of the divine, what humanity gets, it's a fresh form. Now that doesn't outdate the older forms. The earlier incarnations who have come, their forms are still with us. And those forms still continue to inspire and elevate humanity. So what this descent of the divine does is adds one more, shows one more way in which we can try to get in touch with the divine. Oftentimes, even when people say, oh, I believe in God, I have faith in God, sometimes it's helpful to just pause back and say, sure, I have faith in God, but what is my idea about God? Because God is it's a term which makes sense, and yet when you try to think about it, who am I really thinking about? So invariably, unless we have the ability to just dwell on an idea, and some people do have that capacity, but most of us need something a little bit more tangible, something more which the mind can grasp. And it is at that, for such people, that a divine form or any form that will connect me with my spiritual ideal, connect me with my object of meditation will be very, very helpful. The form doesn't necessarily have to be an anthropomorphic form. It could be even a symbol. So a symbol, a form, a pratika, pratima, these are the different words used in Sanskrit. So a form helps. And so the first gift of Ramakrishna was this great form. What is this so special? I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of forms that we have. But what is so special about the form of an avatar? In the Bhagavata, initiating this young devotee called Dhruva, Narada says, when the sacred form of the Lord is thus meditated upon, the mind will quickly get filled with supreme bliss, from which it will not return. That is, the mind will remain absorbed in that bliss. Our mind is like in olden days when people used ink pen, there's something called a blotting paper. It will just absorb the ink. Today we might say it's almost like very spongy qualities to it. So wherever we place our mind, the mind has the tendency to absorb whatever things are associated with that thing. And therefore, if I can find a way to keep my mind engaged with anything that is connected with my spiritual ideal, the mind will tend to absorb the qualities and attributes associated with that form. And because all of these great ones, their lives are filled with purity, truth, love, if the more my mind engages with those forms, the qualities then become a part of my mind. That's why people have often found that the more we meditate, whatever is the object of our meditation, eventually, if that meditation is deep, over time, the qualities associated with that form become our own. And in Ramakrishna's case, it was so amazing. When he was meditating upon Hanuman, for instance, we read in his life, I mean, clearly his level of the intensity and level of his concentration was extremely, extremely high. That during the period that he was meditating on Hanuman, he developed the characteristics of Hanuman, same as when he did it with Radha. So because of in his spiritual practices, we see that the idea that whatever we meditate upon, it changes us somehow. We see that very, very radically demonstrated in Ramakrishna's own life. In the puja that we do here, therefore, before any deity is worshipped, Usually, most of the pujas in the Vedanta society, it begins with a meditation verse. So sometimes you might have seen me holding a flower in hand with a finger like this. It's called a kurma mudra. It's like a tortoise posture, and we chant this meditation verse called dhyana mantra. And the idea is, before you worship any form of the divine, you meditate on the form of that deity. And with that form in the heart, and then you make all these offerings. It's important, though, that when I say that we have to meditate on the form of the deity, now oftentimes that form might come to us in the form of a photograph or an image or a sculpture, and all of these things could be. You see it in some of a photograph. It could be on a photo frame, or if it's a sculpture, it could be on a stone or a wood or all kinds of things. What is important to remember is that when we are meditating, the form is helpful to us in focusing on the deity, but we are not meditating on a photograph. We are not meditating on an image. We are meditating on the reality that these forms represent. And that's very important. It's the difference between a mango and a photograph of a mango. And if you look at a picture of a mango, and if you like mangoes, well, you will be reminded of mangoes. And you might want to go and eat a mango. But then, you can't eat the photograph. It won't be tasty, I guarantee you. Even if it may be a very great picture with great resolution, still it won't taste. You need a real mango. Similarly, when we meditate on the divine, even if we take the support of a form, we are not meditating on the photograph from which that form may come to us, or in an image. So we meditate on the real being, and that's very important to keep in mind. Once a Holy Mother was asked, a devotee who was worshipping Ramakrishna, this is after Ramakrishna's passing, and had this little bit of doubt. Oh, I'm doing this daily worship, but does he really accept it? I'm doing it with faith. I have his photograph on the altar, and I pray and meditate, but is he really there? Or is just I have to just believe that he is there? And this is what the mother said. So the question was, does Ramakrishna really live in the picture? And mother's answer was, of course he does. The body and the shadow are the same. And what is this picture but a shadow? And then the disciple asked, does he live in all the pictures? And the mother said, yes. If you pray to him constantly before his picture, then he manifests himself through that picture. The place where the picture is kept becomes a shrine. And this is very important. It may not be possible for us to every day go to a place of worship. One thing is clear, many of us have seen it in our lives, that each place has a vibe of its own. If you go to a mall, a Times Square, or if you go to a church or a temple, each place kind of feels different. It feels different because the thoughts that people think are real, are tangible. And so when we go to a place where a lot of prayer is done regularly, a lot of meditation is done, a lot of worship is done, there is something happening there. It's not just oh, I just have to believe it. It's not just a question of faith and belief. There's something, there is a presence of the divine in a very inscrutable way. And those who have tuned themselves, have found the resonance to that, are actually able to feel that presence. And therefore, even if it's not possible for us to every day go to such a place where we might be able to feel the presence of God, and in our own home, maybe in your own room, if you have a certain practice of your own, even in some corner of your room, if you have a small little shrine, And if I continue to pray and meditate before my own little personal shrine, and if I do it with regularity, with sincerity, with faith, with love, what Holy Mother says is, it's not simply a matter of my faith, that God will actually be present there, and I will feel that difference. And so that's the power of the divine form. The second gift is his name. I said about name and form. Vivekananda once referred to the name Ramakrishna as, he says, the Ramakrishna name is pure and auspicious and converts sinfulness to purity. In that Vesper hymns that we have, this is the way he describes it in a Sanskrit. So this was originally a translation from Sanskrit. Now the power of the divine name is been described in many different ways and through many different stories in mythology and history as well. Ramakrishna used to say that name and form are inseparable. The moment you see someone known to you, even if you don't call out the name of that person, you at once, the name comes to your mind. Oh, this is so-and-so. Or if you read someone's name, and if you have met that person before, that person's form comes before your mind. So name and form are very intimately connected. In fact, in some devotional schools, the name, God's name, the way we address the divine, the way we connect with the divine, is oftentimes to emphasize the power of God's name. It is sometimes said it is even more powerful than God. So God's name is more powerful than God. And in the story of Ramayana, those of us who have studied that, we know, for instance, that when Sita was abducted by the demon Ravana across the ocean to Sri Lanka, and then this whole search party goes, they know Sita has been taken away, and so Hanuman, there is this big stretch of the ocean in the middle, and so in the beginning he says, oh, how do you go there? And then when he just utters the name of Rama, he's able to in one leap go across the ocean. And then later, when Rama himself had to go, they had to build a bridge. And so sometimes these kind of stories are shown to say, well, God's name is more powerful than God. Again, it's not like to put too much of a mathematical point on it, but the idea is that the name is a little bit more tangible. It's more concrete. It's something I can do something about it. And since the name and form are connected, and since they belong to that divine being, it's holding on to this name and form that I can go to the divine. So the journey is from the tangible to the intangible, holding on to something that I'm able to grasp now, and then gradually, with the power that we acquire through meditating on this form, repeating this name. The repetition of the name is called japa. And Holy Mother used to say, japat siddhihi, that if I can repeat the name of God with faith, with devotion, with regularity, I can become enlightened. And so prayer, every mantra, so japa, mantra is a short form of prayer. So doing japa is same as doing a prayer. So prayer and japa and meditation, all of these are different ways of keeping the mind connected with the divine. These are the words of Ramakrishna regarding the power of name. He says, the birds of sin dwell in the tree of the body. Singing the name of God is like clapping your hands. As at the clap of the hands, the birds in the tree fly away, so do our sins disappear at the chanting of God's name and glories. You find that the water of a reservoir dug in a meadow is evaporated by the heat of the sun. Likewise, the water of the reservoir of sin is dried up by the singing of the name and glories of God. an incident in Ramakrishna's life. So one day when he was sitting in his room and a few devotees were visiting, and so one elderly person was sitting there in the room and with his rosary in hand and was doing prayer. So even when this conversation was going on, so this person is sitting in the corner and meditating. And Ramakrishna looks at him, and then this is what he says. It really, a lot of times when Ramakrishna says something, doesn't seem to be a very good PR move, but he really didn't care. So this is what he said. He said, well, these people practice so much japa and go to so many sacred places, but why are they like this? Why do they make no progress? They make so many pilgrimages and repeat the name of God so much, but why do they not realize anything? And then he answers. He says, it is because they have no longing for God. God reveals himself to the devotees if only he calls upon him with a longing heart. And I think that's very important. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves the question, if I consider myself as a spiritual seeker, then the extent of my spirituality is not to be judged by how many books I have read, or how long I have been going to my church or a temple, or how many lectures or retreats or podcasts one has listened to. All of these might be helpful, but ultimately, has it really changed me? Am I today a better person than what I was a year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago? That's the test of spirituality. Am I a better human being? Because first of all, I need to be a better human being before even I can aspire to imbibe divine qualities within me. And so that is very, very important. And the heart of that is longing. How much do I really long for God? Yes, I believe in God. I trust in God. But how am I really hungry for God? Sometimes you say, oh, I enjoy eating, but I'm not hungry. Then why would I want to go and eat? I mean, sometimes people try still, but only when we are really hungry, then I would want to go and do it. And so all of our spiritual practices may not bear fruit unless and until I am hungry for it. And I can be hungry only when I'm able to convince myself that a daily practice of prayer, meditation, study is in my own interest, is something that is as important as the air I breathe. And none of us questions, oh, why do I need oxygen in life? No, we are careful. We know we need air, we need water, we need food for our survival. How many of us feel that I need God for my survival? Because many of us tend to find, oh, life just goes on fine. Even if I don't think about God, life seems to be going just fine. So if that longing isn't there, then these spiritual practices may not have as quick a transformative effect on us as they can. And finally, very briefly also, the third gift that these great ones give is just their own life, sometimes called the Leela, the different incidents from their lives. Sometimes it may not be easy to always pray to and meditate on a kind of a static form of the divine. It's that time, therefore, then, we have all these amazing incidents from their lives. And so when we think about their life or specific events from their life, that reflection on these specific events and the lessons we learn from them become an object of meditation itself. That is sometimes called the Leela Dhyana. this kind of a lila dhyana in the Bhagavata says it accelerates our spiritual progress. So this is what the Bhagavata says. It is those who always hear about, recite, praise and remember and delight in God's sportive actions that quickly attain to God's lotus feet, which put an end to the cycle of birth and death. So these are the three gifts I briefly wanted to share with you this morning. Name, form, and these inspiring life. These are the gifts that the divine gives humanity every time there is a descent of the divine. And that is why we are blessed today to have so many divine forms to meditate on, so many divine names, so many inspiring lives. And it's good that we have this choice because, as Vivekananda sometimes said, that inspiration was never filtered out to humanity through just one person, through one form. So it is good because we people, we are different. We have a different ways of thinking. And it's good that we have a choice. If one thing doesn't quickly resonate with me, there is something else that will. And so the idea is, no matter which form, which name, or which life becomes the kind of a doorway for me to enter the divine realm, ultimately, the goal is to go beyond all forms, beyond all names, and beyond all manifestations. The truth itself, the truth or the being of the divine transcends all names and forms and all of these distinctions. But in order to reach that state of transcendence, we have to make best use of the tools that are available to us. And so when we reflect and meditate on these great lives, this is one way we can try to see that this is the gift that has been given to me, and how well I can use that gift, that will determine how best I can make a success out of my own life. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Next Sunday, our subject will be Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's another great saint who is also worshipped as incarnation especially among the devotional schools of among spiritual seekers. His birthday comes in the next week, and so we will reflect on his life and message next Sunday. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. On Wednesday, we will continue our study in the Vedanta study group. That's on Wednesday at 7:30. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our meditations will also continue as usual at 6 o'clock in the evening. Let's conclude now with a prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.